try to get started now. So I'm very happy to welcome you to this conference. It's ICAHD's first ever Scottish conference. And I'm also delighted I'm Secretary of the Scottish Palestinian Forum, who have been helping facilitate the conference. The forum has, of course, on a number of occasions welcomed Jeff and organised speaking engagements for him up in Scotland. But as I say, this conference is a first. The forum is primarily a networking organisation. People can join as individuals or can join as groups, and indeed ICAHD UK is ICAHD UK is a member group. And an example of what we do is when Jeff visited a couple of years ago, one of the things that the forum helped to organise was a joint meeting in Dundee between Jeff speaking on behalf of ICAHD and another member group, the Dundee Nablus Twinning Association. So that's very much what we do. Over the past year, we've supported the Palestine Film Festival and also an exhibition of poetry from Palestinian children in Gaza. Because what the forum does is we seek to promote knowledge and understanding of the Palestinian people. And we also seek to influence public discussions in Scotland relating to a just and secure future and a sharing of the land for all the people that belong in it. So I hope everybody's got a conference pack. They are on the table at the back there. Inside you will find, as well as the agenda for today, the different information on ICAHD, and there's also a fact sheet about the forum and details on that, how to contact the forum if you are interested in becoming a member. And I'll be around during the lunch break if anybody wants to ask anything. So, but as I say, welcome and delighted to have you here.
Thank you, Jan. The first time I met Jan was in Hebron in Shuhada Street, the Apartheid road, when confronted by the members of the IDF, and this little Scottish feisty woman stood up against them in a confrontation there. But my name is Linda Ramsden. I'm the director of ICAHD UK, and Jan mentioned that this is the first time ICAHD UK has had a conference up here. And so we're delighted to be here. We welcome all of you who've come. I'm sorry about massive clash in other events happening today. So we're grateful that you have made the time to come here to be with us. And we're very grateful for the Quakers for facilitating this meeting. Now, I was trying to find somebody who would tell us about fire exits and all that, and I don't know. There's a sign back there that says fire exit to the right and one going down the stairs. There are toilets around here on different floors. Look for the sign. I hope that you've managed to get a cup of coffee or tea when you came in. So it's at the back of the room, you turn to the right. And of course, during the lunch hour, there will be teas, coffees available to you then, and I think biscuits. So that's great. Now I just want to say a little bit more about us. ICAHD UK was founded 20 years ago in the Houses of Parliament. And since then, we've focused very much on education, awareness raising, lobbying, really working hard to support ICAHD here in the UK. And that's also involved recruiting internationals to be part of our rebuilding of Palestinian homes as acts of nonviolent political resistance in Palestine. ICAHD's rebuilt 189 homes. But that is an activity we cannot do at this time at all. Everything's changed on the ground. You think of all the drones and the presence of the Israeli army. in the occupied territory. It's a very frightening time. Our conference a year ago was in London on the 29th of September. And we had again a very wide range of speakers covering various topics. You know, these experts in their fields came in. So along with Jeff, we had others. And one of the focuses that we had was with a Palestinian mental health professional. And we were looking at just how traumatized Palestinian society is. Everybody's affected, you know, from living under occupation. We also touched on signs of encouragement, such as with young Jews who are, you know, looking at this issue far more critically and not following in the paths of their parents, giving this uncritical support of Israel. And so they're learning more, they're protesting, being parts of movements. We went away from that conference with some optimism. We felt there's real movement. And yet, less than 2 weeks after that was October the 7th, when Hamas broke out of Gaza. And you know, since then, the entire mode in the world has changed. And we've seen, you know, our governments being complicit, and yet we've seen millions of people out on the streets. And so some of these reactions and activities since then is going to be covered in our program today. We're starting now slightly off track, slightly later. So, but there is a little cushion time built into the afternoon, so we'll adjust our timings so that we can still finish on time.
I'm sorry, could you get the blind down a bit?
Ah, the blind. There is a blind there.
It's just done it with it.
Thank you, yeah, that's going to help. So the sessions today are being recorded. Okay, thank you, thank you. Our sessions today are being recorded, so you can access them at a later time. And we did also have a conference in London a week ago today, and with some different speakers there. But a bit of overlap, as you'll learn about. And so all those will be available to you. Okay, now we were going to start with setting the scene with seeing some film footage, but is that working yet, or we'll delay it? Okay, we'll delay that, because we wanted to take you right back to Palestine and show you some film footage, but that will come later. So right now, I think we need to start with our program.
Okay.
And we're going to start with Daoud Ghoul from Silwan in Jerusalem. So I met David a year and a half ago, I think, at meetings in London talking about one democratic state. Jeff, of course, has known David for much longer than that, and they've met up in Jerusalem. So David is here now in the UK, Newcastle upon Tyne, and he is studying, he's a human geography PhD student, Newcastle University, and he comes having worked in different positions in East Jerusalem, Silwan, just below the old city, very much contested area that we visited many times over the years as well. So David, I think it's best that I call you to the platform, and David will speak to us, and then Jeff will speak to us, and then we're going to do a Q&A together with them, okay? David.
David.
Daoud. David in English. Daoud.
I have a story about David and Daoud. How about that later?
Okay.
Thank you for this opportunity, and thanks for everyone for attending this meeting. What I will try to do is to cover some important topics and questions that I think is essential and important to touch when we talk about Palestine. So I think with Palestine, I think it's very maybe click it on.
Huh?
It's
It's off. Oh, no, all right. So maybe stand up.
Is it fine? Can you everyone see me and hear me clearly? Fine. Okay. Thanks again. So I think one of the things that I have to highlight and to say it's very important, it's the premises when we talk about Palestine. There's a disagreement on the approach that we when we talk about Palestine, and I can say we have sometimes different axioms for what is Palestine, what is the settler colonialism in Palestine. So I will start with this to say, from a Palestinian perspective, colonialism in Palestine, it's a settler colonial project, but it has also a meaning, an interpretation what means a settler colonial project. Settler colonial project.
Could you stand up?
Yeah. Yeah, settler colonial project, it's not just a settler colonial project, it's the extension, it's the continuity of the Western colonialism. So the reforming of the Western colonialism in Palestine was done through the Zionist movement to a settler colonial project, entity, and state. So this is one very important element. So the connection, and as it's described in the settler colonial literatures, the mother country of Israel, it's not one country, it's the West. And we can see that this connection clearly with different layers or features of Israel, including culture, identity, languages, and also the support, unconditional support. And this is a different approach from a Western perspective that usually described on the right of existence for Israel and the right to defend itself, that it's including the right of genocide with continuity of unconditional support for war crimes and everything. So because as many literatures describe the rule of Israel as a functioning state on behalf of the Western colonialism or imperialism, and it depends of how, which literature we are trying to highlight and which topics. So this connection is still there, and it's represented by the military actions. The functioning rule of Israel to keep the superiority through army, it's still there, and usually it's called in Hebrew harta'a, or the deterrence. So the power of the army, or Israel as an army that got a state, it includes the deterrence power to keep the white superiority and supremacy over all the Arab countries. And this is very clear in many different levels, including economy and including wars. And this is what we see nowadays, and within the operations against Iran or Iran against Israel, we can see this conversation, the violence conversation that is happening to try to draw a new power relation over deterrence in the region. So the military and army feature of Israel is very important part of the settler colonial project. And it's done for a purpose, for, as many literature says, settler colonialism, it's about land, it's about expanding the land. It's about territories and trying to take more lands. And this is what we might see, and hopefully not, with what's happening in North Gaza with projects and plans to build settlements. And it's happening already in Jerusalem, West Bank, and in different places. And if there is a victory in Lebanon, it might be the scenario in the future. So it's also about land. And to take the land without the people, it was described as ethnic cleansing, elimination, and different literatures talked about it. And that's why Palestinians become the challenge, as it's described by many different Israeli policies, and sometimes they call Palestinians as a bomb or demographic bomb that is making the uniqueness of the Zionist project as a pure Western Jewish project, Western Jewish Zionist Jewish project, in danger because the majority of the population might not be Jews, and this is a feature. And then to keep the domination, there is a way to get rid of the people, the Palestinian people or the others. And this is the narrative that we have. Demonizing the others, it's done in many different levels, including media. So we can see it clearly in the Western media that is producing a culture. So the domination is done in ideology, in politics, in army, and in different other levels, including the domination on the ground by military operation. So that's why we have the military occupation and many different policies, mechanisms of military domination in Palestine that include doing like war crimes or etc. In this case, this relation with the Western countries reminding us that Israel was established by a United Nations decision. So there was no Jewish state in the Arab countries, and never dividing the people to religious groups in a way that this is like a Christian state and this is a Muslim state and this is a Jewish state. It was done as part of divide and conquer, dividing and ruling the Arab countries, which is continuing until now by dividing the subdivided to sub-subdivided countries and creating a Kurdish state and the Ayzadi state maybe in the future, and Shia state and the Sunni state, dividing the divided already states. And this is a continuous strategy that is effectively dividing the people and creating more terrible situation in many different countries. And the explicit or the complicit of the United Nations and different Western countries, it's very obvious. It's not just obvious why the United Nations decided to create a Jewish state before 1948. It's obvious by never implementing any decision of the United Nations to return back the Palestinian refugees or to end the occupation. And nowadays we can see a genocide. And almost nothing, no statements. And we can see how the ICJ is neutralized from taking decisions on the genocide, the ongoing genocide for more than 1 year. So this is the connection that we can see, and that's why it's important to speak here in the UK, in Europe, in the United States, in the West, because the power, the change can be done effectively from here. And there is a strong power on the West that can be moved, mobilized, done in a way that will really make a big change and easier than waiting for more and more death and killing of people to reach a justice and better future. So I think there is a strong power that we have to use it in many different ways to put pressure on different governments and bodies to stop arming Israel, to stop the genocide, to stop the military occupation, to create a justice in Palestine and also in the world. And within this long history of Palestine, I'm not going to say to repeat the history. I think it's there. If you want to learn about history, we have plenty of books and literatures and resources everywhere. And this is the obvious question and answer that the story and the history never started by the 7th of October. 7th of October, it's just an event. Describe it whatever, I'm not going to speak about the 7th of October. It's just one event within a long history of military occupation, settler colonialism, and colonialism, even before the beginning of the Zionism in Palestine. There was colonialism and resistance. So the resistance continued, and we have many events. 7th of October is one event within a long history of Palestinian resistance against colonialism and settler colonialism. The significance about the 7th of October, it's the moment of time where everyone we were busy with secondary struggles, not the real main struggle. The main struggle in Palestine, it's as described in academia, it's the aim of the settler colonizers to eliminate the people. Elimination, it's existence. And that's why all the time Palestinians were saying existence is resistance. So it's a struggle for existence, and it's this existential struggle means that you're struggling to survive, and not for economy, not struggling for a state, not struggling for better engagement with high-tech or Silicon Valley, or to reproduce Singapore style in Gaza, or anything than existing and surviving from the aims of the settler colonialism to eliminate Palestinian people. The elimination is done in many different ways, and obviously is done in Gaza by a genocide. And it was very clear message by the Israeli army at the very beginning, the very first days of the genocide, that the plan is, as they describe it in Hebrew, kibush, girush, nahlut, occupation, forced transfer, and building settlements. So this is what we are witnessing. It was there all the time. With the very first days, the project of what is going to happen in Gaza was announced publicly and never hidden. So we are witnessing that slowly with like a long process of a struggle and ongoing genocide. So the 7th of October brought back the struggle from different secondary, as I will describe it, struggles to the main struggle for survival, struggle for existing in Palestine. And this is the significance about the 7th of October, that we cannot really talk about anything else than the life of the people. And this is what we are losing. And if we are talking about the future, we cannot really promise a future for thousands of people that were killed. There is no future for families that were eliminated. We're talking about hundreds of houses, thousands of houses in West Bank, where we have the ICAHD working hardly about it. But now cities were eliminated. No more buildings, no more people in Gaza. So we cannot talk about permissions for building houses or renovating houses while we have cities being eliminated. And we have plenty of literatures in academia talking about it as urbicide or feminicide or scholasticide. Everything is being eliminated. And the genocide is really targeting people, and also stones, buildings, infrastructures, and everything. We can say it's not the first time. This strategy were used many times since the Second World War, and it's ongoing. But the scale that we have in Gaza, it's never happened. Scale of bombing, the scale of the killing, the scale of damaging and eliminating cities, it's never happened before. So within this situation, I think the most important and significant result of the ongoing genocide is removing the masks. So no more masks nowadays on anyone. And it's very obvious that we can tell the good politics and bad politics for everyone. And it's still going, and masks will be more and more removed because we don't have one mask. Like layers of masks and truth being revealed. It's very hard, price is very high for removing the masks, but I think removing the masks is a step with very high price for a big change. And the change has started to happen. The change is not just about Palestine and Israel or Palestinians. The change is a global change. Palestine is a key geography in the globe. That's why we can hear more about Palestine and Palestinians and the genocide in Palestine more than in Sudan or in what's happening in South Africa or what's happening in different other places where we still have apartheid, we still have also maybe genocide in a different scales and civil wars and colonialism or other type of killing the people. And you know, Palestine had a very significant political rule and geographical rule that will change the or reform the international power relation and community. The failure of the United Nations, the International Justice Court, and the international community to stop genocide is a failure that might lead to reforming all these bodies in the future. And this is a big change that started from Gaza and expanding everywhere. And I think will be significantly changing in many different places. And we can, in the UK as example, we can feel this change with like changes in the elections, results of voting, the awareness of the people, the strategies that is happening is a very slow change, but it's there, it started. And it's not limited to Palestine and the Palestinians. It's expanding, and I can see it more with the new generations and the awareness that they have, their interest to learn more, their interest to be engaged and to go out of the ideological domination of the colonial ideology machines through media, universities, and it's a big struggle that removed masks. At the same time, it's an eye-opening for the new generation to look for more and different realities and look for justice. So within this, I can go back to Palestine with the typical topic that we started having, what is the day after, or what is the solutions, and which scenarios do we have? I think for me as a Palestinian, it's very hard to talk about the day after while the genocide is still ongoing and it's expanding to Lebanon and might expand to different other areas, and Israel is trying all the time to expand it to a regional or a global war. So we don't see a solution while we see the war expanded to different geographies. And it's still ongoing with no one stopping the ongoing genocide. At the same time, I think with the big changes that I mentioned, there will be a possibility for a different future. I will not say a better future, but it's a big struggle. But there will be a big change also in Palestine. And really, I cannot really imagine what will be next. But as we used to say, is there worst scenarios? Mm-hmm. And we always got worst and worst scenarios. But I hope with these worst scenarios that a better future might emerge. It's not that easy. We cannot even imagine what can be a better future for Gaza, for all the people who are injured, losing families, losing everything, losing hope, losing trust on international community and even other countries and justice. Within that, I think there is still possibility to work hard, first of all, to stop the genocide, to stop war crimes, and then to stop the settler colonialism and colonialism in the globe, and to try to find a way to start a new scenario without colonialism. We have different scenarios, and one of the scenarios that I was asked to speak about is my perspective on the one democratic state. So I also find it hard because this is like a scenario without a connection to how we can reach it. So the question of a solution is not offered. There is no solution offered for the Palestinians. No one state, no two states, no three states, no even any kind of solution. So the only way for looking for a future is the existence of the Palestinian. And I don't know. That's why I mentioned that also the military feature and reality is very important, because within the ongoing situation, I think the gateway or the possibility to go for a solution or for a future, from my personal perspective, is the results of the war. It's the victory-defeat relation on the ground, which is very hard situation, but it's a reality that we should not hide or ignore, because within all the ongoing wars and genocide and escalations, I don't see any other scenario to find an exit of the current situation. The exit will lead us to where we are going. I can say also, and again, people living together in democracy, it's possible, but it has to go through ending the occupation, ending colonialism, and not just as a romantic idea of living together. Without ending the occupation, no possibilities for ending the struggle, but ending the struggle by ending the occupation, there is many possibilities for building collaboration, partnership, life, hope, future, and democracy. So it's a very hard situation, I know, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have, and I will stop here.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Daoud. If you two just swap, and then you'll come back for our Q&A with Daoud and Jeff. We will do at the same time. So I'll move straight into Jeff. Now he's going to show a PowerPoint presentation. Jan referred to the fact earlier that Jeff Halper has been to Scotland before. He was here a couple of years ago. Perhaps several of you heard him then. But Jeff Halper is an Israeli citizen, born in the States. He's an anthropologist. He's taught at universities. He was professor of anthropology during his career. But then he's always been an activist from the time of civil rights, the civil rights movement in America, and then moved to Israel and working on a more just and sustainable, egalitarian society there. Little did he know that he would end up spending his entire life, also working on this issue. But in 1997, the Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions was established. And so Jeff will, I think through the film you'll see later and some of what he might say, he will elaborate a little bit about what that activism has involved. Standing in front of bulldozers, confronting IDF soldiers, being arrested, all of that is part of it. But Jeff is also a communicator. So he's much sought after by the media, and he's a communicator in terms of writing as well, and he has several books. His last two books included War Against the People, and that is Israel, the Palestinians, and Global Pacification, and Decolonizing Israel, Liberating Palestine, Zionism, Settler Colonialism, and the Case for One Democratic State. I have to tell you that during this tour, we've been selling Jeff's books. We've just sold out. We've just sold out wherever we've been. He's been in about 8 cities, and the books sent up to Scotland, they've already gone. Already yesterday. I'm really sorry, but you can still get them through the website. You can contact us, and information is in your pack. Jeff, I could go on and on and on.
Without further ado.
Without further ado, please take the floor, ladies and gentlemen, Jeff Halper.
Well, it's good to see you all again. I've been to Glasgow about 6 times already, I guess, over the years, so...
And we're in Edinburgh.
I'm in Edinburgh. I've been in Edinburgh 7 times, Glasgow 6 times. The last time was Jan, who was, took me around. I had sciatica, so I was limping around the city. You know, but we're in a very difficult time now, much more so than previously. And I just want to start with 2 acknowledgments. I want to build on what Daoud said. Settler colonialism is key to understanding the logic, the events, the intentions of Israel, and how the Palestinians can cope with all of that and lead to a scenario that's just and workable. So I want to kind of build on that today, but I do want to acknowledge the genocide going on in Gaza, and actually in the West Bank as well. It's like Daoud said, it's not a genocide that began on October 7th, it's a genocide that began actually with the Nakba in 1947, 1948, but with the intention of a genocide already when Zionism began, you know, at the turn of the 20th century. Because as I'll say, genocide is built into settler colonialism. You can't come and take someone else's country and take their land and displace them and replace them with your own people and completely transform one country into the settler country without genocide, both cultural and physical, as we can see today. So I want to acknowledge what's happening in Gaza, the West Bank, Lebanon, hopefully not Iran. We'll see. There was an attack, as you all know, last night, but I think the deal so far has been that it'll be very limited. Iran has said there wasn't much damage, and that might be the closure of that. We'll have to see. So first of all, acknowledging that, I'm saying acknowledging the genocide in Gaza because we're going to political analysis, Daoud and I and the conference, and political analysis, you know, is very cold. It's an analysis. It's calculated and with a vision to a future, with coexistence and shared, you know, a complete dissonance with the actual reality of genocide that we're living in. So in a way, it's very difficult to put those things together, but we have to because, you know, genocide is happening and obviously it's absorbing our attention as it should. But at the same time, political events are also going on. It isn't that the United States and NATO and even the Arab countries have stopped all their political plans and activities, you know, while the genocide is happening. Especially the process of normalization that I want to talk about in a minute. I have even a second acknowledgement, actually, and that is that because it fits into our analysis, that I'm a settler. I mean, as Linda just said, I grew up in the United States, and I settled actually. I mean, that wasn't the term I thought of at the time. It wasn't exactly what I was doing, although I didn't come as a Zionist, I have to say. I came I'm not going to get all of this, but in the context of the 60s, to another front in the revolution. Some of us remember the revolution with the capital R that we used to promote in the 1960s, and it was a more meaningful front. But from the very beginning, I was involved with the peace movement in Israel and with the Palestinian issue. But nevertheless, I'm a settler, and as I say in my book, I call myself a settler who refuses. So it's very important, if we're going to move on to one state or to any scenario of coexistence, that the Israelis acknowledge and that they are settlers. They're not all going to be settlers who refuse by any means, but that's the role I think that I have in this struggle. So what I want to do is build on what Daoud said, on the set of colonial, and then because that creates the logic that then from that flows the idea of one democratic state. We're both involved in the one democratic state campaign that flows out of the set of colonial analysis. So let's begin. We're talking about a reframing. And ICAHD has done this over the years all the time. The reframings have changed as the situations have changed, but we really have to watch our language. We have to decolonize our language because the terminology we use determines the way we look at things. And, the diagnosis is important. If you go to the doctor, with a pain, it could be something serious, it could be something minor. So the diagnosis is crucial in terms of your survival and your well-being. Well, the Israel-Palestine conflict has been misdiagnosed all these years. And there's been 1,000 peace processes and negotiations and this and that, all based on a misdiagnosis, and therefore we've never gotten to the actual treatment that's effective and just. And the problem is the word conflict, because it's a term we all use. We all talk about the Arab-Israeli conflict, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Even the Palestinians talk about conflict all the time. That's really the term that we all use. But it's a trap for Palestinians, and it's a misdiagnosis because this is not a conflict. A conflict involves two sides, right? At least two sides. Well, settler colonialism should not be a side. Settler colonialism is not legitimate. It's not legal, it's not just, it's immoral, and there's no way to justify it. So it has no standing. But the minute we talk about a conflict, what we're doing is we're elevating settler colonialism to a side. Now it has, the very fact that we're calling it a conflict makes settler colonialism Zionism a side, and it gives it that legitimacy. Now the Zionists can say, look, even the Arabs see us as a side. So that's one problem. The other problem, of course, is that it also makes the indigenous population, the Palestinians, into a side. They're not a side. They've never been in a conflict with the Jews. Palestinians do not have a history of pogroms. They're not the Cossacks. Jews have lived peacefully, not only in Palestine, but in the Middle East for millennia already. So there is no conflict there. And of course, the Palestinians aren't in a conflict at all. What?
Could you just go that way a little bit? Thank you.
Okay. And that is that they're the indigenous population. I mean, they're in their country, they're on their land, they have their culture, they're living their lives. They're not a side in anything. They're a complete whole people in their homeland on their own. But by all of a sudden saying this is a conflict, all of a sudden they become a side in something. And now they have to justify their whole existence. You know, why is this land ours? Why, you know, and so that they're trapped as a side now. Now, what is it? How do you resolve a conflict? Through negotiations and compromise. So all of a sudden, the Palestinians are in a process of being just a side, rather than really than the whole story, just a side that now is being forced to negotiate over rights that they have that they shouldn't even be talking about. Why should we be forcing the Palestinians to negotiate over how much of their own country they can keep from the settler colonialists? First of all, that's unfair, but the whole idea that somehow the settlers have some legitimate claim to any of that, you know, is simply not true, but that's, again, part of the conflict dynamic. Why should the Palestinians have to negotiate and haggle over how many refugees come back? I mean, we're really forcing them into an unjust and really untenable situation where now they're fighting for 22% of their own homeland. And somehow, you see, that's the power of the conflict model. Somehow now we think that a two-state solution based on the Palestinian people getting 22% of their own country is just, because that's what should be negotiated in the conflict resolution process. So it traps them. They can't win in a conflict mode, and it also, again, allows it legitimizes and allows settler colonialism to prevail and lead to, finally, normalization, which is how settler colonialism ends. So instead of conflict, we have to talk about, we have to adopt an anti-colonial language. We need new terminology. And rather than the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, I would suggest the name of what we're engaged in is an anti-colonial struggle against Zionist settler colonialism. That's the name. That's the terminology we should use. It might be a little bit long. We might have to find ways, you know, in the soundbitey world we live in, to, you know, find ways to say it in a shorter way, more concise way. But this is what we're talking about. And struggle is a much better term than conflict, because struggle does not imply two sides. It implies a struggle of one side, in a sense, or a struggle of a people against. Now, against what? Well, that gives you the window then to say, yes, against settler colonialism. So the people struggling begin to have the privilege of defining what they're struggling against, rather than the strong side in the conflict, which is the settlers, you know, them defining, you know, what they're fighting, you know. So, you know, the Israeli, and you hear from Kamala Harris, the Israeli settler state is struggling, or is it a conflict, or you know, for self-defense. We have a right to self-defense. That's how the state defines it. Well, in a struggle, of course, that gives voice to the oppressed, to the indigenous, that can say what, like Daoud just said, you know, that the Palestinians should be in a place to define and articulate what they're struggling against. And that shouldn't be the prerogative. And that's another problem with the conflict model, of course, is that not only does it create a false symmetry between the sides, but one side is infinitely more powerful than the other one. I mean, Israel is today a state. You know, it's a member of the UN. It has all the rights and privileges and resources of a state against the other side, which is a non-state actor, right? So that, just one tiny example, you know, we always talk about Israel importing and exporting arms. You know, it gets $4.5 billion a year from the United States in arms. It's an arms trade with Britain, with the UK, you know, and that's normal. But when the Palestinians resist, you see, resist. Now, resistance is not legitimate in a conflict. You can fight with each other, but when the actual fighting is over, and again, in the fighting, there's an assumption of some kind of symmetry that doesn't exist. I mean, it's not a Gaza war. We talk about the war in Gaza. It's not a war. I mean, the Hamas is not an army. It's not a state. It doesn't have the arms that Israel does. And the actual victims, of course, are the people, the civilians. This is a unilateral assault on Gaza, just like settler colonialism is a unilateral invasion of a country. There are, again, no sides. But then, of course, not only is it the state, non-state thing, but Israel does export-import. When the Palestinians, now, all right, they have no right to resist because, you know, after the fighting, you go back to a peace process. You go back to negotiations. You go back to compromise, right? That's what conflict resolution is. Well, if I'm resisting, I'm breaking the rules. Palestinians should not be resisting in the conflict model. They should be participating in peacemaking with the other side, with their settler colonial oppressors and conquerors. They should be, so resistance in that framework is criminalized and it's called terrorism. And it's illegitimate because you can't put together conflict resolution and ongoing resistance. So that Israel imports and exports arms. What do the Palestinians do? They smuggle arms. You see the difference in the you know, so the state has a legitimate right, a monopoly over the use of force, to import arms, billions of dollars, but the indigenous population that really has the sole right to resist, to struggle against a colonial force, has no right to resist. And so we use terms like they're smuggling arms. That criminalizes the resistance. So you can see all the problematics. I can go on for hours on the problem of this term. We have to stop using the word conflict and language related to it and move to an anti-colonial struggle. And that's why this, you know, as Daoud and I are saying, the idea of settler colonialism is so key to understanding. Now, I'm not going to get into a whole sort of a thing, but nevertheless, settler colonialism has a logic, it has a pattern to it, all over, wherever it's done, and it's important to understand. The main point I want to make in this talk is the point about normalization. I mean, it's a very boring, dry, gray, academic term, normalization. But at the same time, it's the key. Because that is how settler colonialism ends. You know, as T.S. Eliot said, it doesn't end with a bang, it ends with a whimper. And that settler colonialism does all its violence, all the displacement, all the genocide that's built into it, everything that has to go into a violent campaign of taking over someone else's country, all right? And then that's all buried under normalization. Then it becomes normal, and all that violence and displacement and genocide is forgotten because it's the normal situation that everybody sees and begins to live with. I'm going to come back to that, but that's the key to understanding how Israel's succeeding. So, all right, so that there's three stages of Zionist colonialism. The first stage, I would say, is 1882, when the proto-Zionists invade Palestine, before the official Zionist movement, to 1947, which is the partition plan. And I'm not going to go into all of this, but of course the settlers invent a narrative about why they're entitled to take over the land. Without the narrative, they would simply be criminals. I mean, they are criminals anyway, but they would simply be criminals because they're coming and conquering, taking somebody's country. The narrative is what justifies it all and kind of lets them off the hook, and they become the good people, and the native population become the foils, the bad. And of course, Zionism had a ready-made narrative, which is the Bible, and particularly the genocidal book of the Bible, the book of Joshua. And in fact, this is actually the second round of settler colonialism, because Joshua's invasion, where God tells him and the Israelites to kill every man, woman, child, donkey, cow, goat, dog, everything that's living in the entire Palestine as they're conquering it, was the first round of genocidal settler colonialism. All right, the settlers invade, and this is the definition really of settler colonialism, with the intent of transforming, in our case, an Arab country into a Jewish country, transforming Palestine into Israel. And here's another term then that comes out that we never use, that's so crucial: Judaization. We don't talk about Judaization. We talk about apartheid, we talk about occupation, we talk about, but, and maybe people are a little uncomfortable with it, because if you're not Jewish, it sounds vaguely anti-Semitic or something. But this is exactly the term. This is what Zionism intended. This was the purpose: to Judaize Palestine, to make Palestine a Jewish country. And we should be emphasizing that by using terms like Judaization. Of course, colonialism is a violent process, and so, but under the British Mandate, which was most of this time, from 1922 until 47, the British, you all, were constraining the Zionists, so they weren't able to conquer and to begin to engage in the cleansing of Palestine the way they would have had they had their druthers. And so, but nevertheless, they knew that that was coming. I mean, you know the conquest is coming, you know you have to take over the country, and so they practiced, in the framework of the mandate, in the Great Arab Revolt of 1936 to 39, when the Zionist forces, especially the Haganah, that became the nucleus of the Israeli army, engaged with the British in violently suppressing the revolt of the 1930s, where thousands of Palestinians were killed. But you see, it's kind of ancient history. We don't really talk about that. And then, of course, and this is the point I want to make, Zionism, because it goes back to normalization. After every stage, it's normalized and legitimized. And what legitimized Zionism was the Balfour Declaration of 1917. That's what transformed Zionism from the idea of a few crazy people into an actual political movement, you know, blessed by the strongest government in the world at that time, you all. And in the Balfour Declaration that was dictated by Chaim Weizmann, the Zionist leader here, the Arabs are not mentioned in the Balfour Declaration, as you probably know. The Palestinians are 90% of the population of the country, and they're not mentioned. All the Balfour Declaration talks about, besides the Jewish right to the country and promoting a Jewish national home and a Jewish agency to begin to move forward the Zionist project, it calls the indigenous Palestinians the existing non-Jewish communities. And then the Balfour Declaration, that was celebrated by your government in 2017 as a wonderful thing in all the parties. So, you know, this is how, you know, I mean, settler colonialism has not gotten a bad name in terms of Palestine, at least in the UK. Then the Balfour Declaration was taken whole cloth into the League of Nations mandate to Britain in 1922. And finally, the legitimization of this stage of Zionism comes about with the UN Partition Plan of 1947, in which the UN, with no authority, partitions Palestine so that the Jews get 56% of the country, even though they were only a third of the population, and most of them had come within the last 15 or 20 years. They were newcomers. They got the majority of the country and the best land, and the Palestinians got 46% of their own country, you know, and the other 2% being Jerusalem and Bethlehem that were internationalized. So you see the process of legitimization and normalization going on. The second stage from 48 to 67, of course, now you have the outburst of the violence that's embedded in settler colonialism that wasn't allowed to come out during the British period. British are gone, even before the British leave. You begin to have the organized state violence. Israel begins to import arms as a state. Doesn't have to smuggle anymore, right? Organized state violence, war, ethnic cleansing, and so you begin to have the conquest. Half the land allocated to the Palestinians is now conquered by the Zionists. Now Israel expands to 78% of the country. 85% of the Palestinians living in what became Israel are driven out, and they become the refugees of today. Palestinians are denationalized. They're now called Israeli Arabs. We don't use the word Palestinian in Israel. And now you have this, besides the violence, you have the systematic Judaization of the country. So the entire landscape has changed. More than 500 entire villages, towns, and urban areas are demolished systematically. Their populations driven out and replaced then by, not only replaced by Israeli or Jewish settlers, but the names of all the communities are changed. So you erase completely the cultural presence of Palestinians, which is a form of cultural genocide. And more than 90% of the land was confiscated. And again, my point is, at the end, it's all normalized. Because in 1949, the expanded state of Israel is accepted as a member, a full member of the United Nations. Not Palestine, but Israel is accepted not in, Israel should have been accepted within the 1947 partition lines. That was the definition of the Jewish state by the UN. It was never, that resolution never expired, but instead the United Nations, the international community, accepted Israel as a state on the expanded, conquered territory that it had taken from the Palestinians, which is against international law. The 14th Convention prohibits the acquisition of territory by force. But this again is the normalization. And finally, the third stage, which is from 67 to the present, is we're in the culminating phase of settler colonialism. So you get, again, the outbursts of the organized state violence. You have the war in 1967. The rest of Palestine is conquered. That was always intended. It happened in 1967, but it could have happened at any time. It was intended to take the entire country. And what Israel does then to foreclose any possible Palestinian state, the real two-state solution, so-called, is it imposes a whole matrix of control, as I call it, over the West Bank and Gaza, military rule, and confining Palestinians to little territories, little enclaves, and okay, and now with all that being normalized, that's normalized as well. When in the Oslo peace process, in John Kerry's initiative, you remember in 2006, in Biden's idea of normalization that we should be going through today, there is never a mention of dismantling the settlements. On the contrary, in Oslo, you had the whole peace process, but settlements were allowed to go on. In 1993, you had 200,000 settlers. By 2000, when Oslo collapsed, you had 400,000 settlers. Today, there's almost 800,000 settlers, right? So that in all these all these processes, the settlements in the West Bank have become normalized. I mean, they're criticized here and there, but they're not a part of the peace process. Normalization with Saudi Arabia can go on with the settlements. So what we're really talking about now with the normalization of the settlements is an apartheid regime over all of Palestine, from the river to the sea. Now, we thought that apartheid would be, we made a map years ago of apartheid, because apartheid's the only way out for settler colonialism. It has three options. It can either kill all the indigenous population, right, to eliminate that population. Zionism was never able to do that. Unlike the United States, for example, Argentina certainly, other places that did that wasn't an option. The second is to drive them all out. So you get them all out of the country. Well, Zionism did drive out half the Palestinians. Half the Palestinians today are refugees, but they're stuck with the other half. There are 7 million Palestinians still in Palestine with 7 million Israelis. So in that scenario, the only way out to have a Jewish state over all of Palestine is apartheid. You have to confine those 7 million into a Bantustan, just like South Africa. You can't give them citizenship, because then it wouldn't be a Jewish state. So you have to either, and create conditions that are so difficult, we see that in Gaza now, that they leave or they're driven out. But at any rate, so we had the idea of apartheid. It was very clear to us. It's areas A and B. I won't get into all that, what that means. Areas A and B and Gaza, which is 15% of Palestine. That would be the Palestinian Bantustan, the Palestinian state in the two-state idea. And that's, in fact, the area that is the Palestinian Authority today. This is what Abu Mazen is the president of. But now we see, in the last year, not only since October 7th, even before, that that's too much for Zionism to concede to Arabs. And so what we're seeing now is two things. First of all, in the West Bank, Bezalel Smotrich, who's this violent settler, who's become the head of the civil administration of the Israeli military government of the West Bank, is now stripping the Palestinian Authority of its authority over Area B, which is 22% of the West Bank, almost a quarter of the West Bank. And instead, the civil administration is now saying, in violation of the Oslo agreements, now we can begin to expropriate land in Area B, demolish homes in Area B, build settlements in Area B, which means then that now the Palestinian Bantustan is being shrunk even more to less than 10% of Palestine, which means Area A in the north, Area A in the center, A in the south. And in Gaza, I agree with Daoud, if I understand you, I think they'll never be permitted to come back to northern Gaza. I don't think there'll be settlement there because it's uninhabitable. I mean, even settlers couldn't live there. The water is alkaline, with the hundreds of thousands of tons of rubble, the whole soil has become acidic, and it's, the sewage for decades now, has backed up and polluted the groundwater, the sea. I think it's uninhabitable. It's like the moon. And I don't think it'll be habitable, who knows for how many decades, if not centuries. And so the Palestinians there will be confined to the south, in Rafah. And I think there's also a plan to parcel them out to countries all over the world under the guise of humanitarian, aid for refugees. So here's where the humanitarian comes in conflict with the political. Humanitarian can help in the ethnic cleansing process of Israel by taking refugees, so-called, out of Gaza to other countries. So this is where we're headed. Now, I think what Biden and the international community, you know, what Daoud is talking about, especially the global north, led by the United States and NATO, what they're relying on is that people don't see this map. Most people don't look at a map. They have no idea where the West Bank is. They don't see the fine print. And so if you know, Biden and everyone need a two-state solution. I mean, they need to somehow finish this Palestinian issue. They need a two-state solution. Israel needs a two-state solution. Because, you know, if it's one state, they have to somehow incorporate these 7 million Palestinians. So they need that. But they're banking on the fact that nobody knows what that means. So, if Israel is on 90% of the west of Palestine, the Palestinians are confined to 10% or less of their own country, okay, that 10%, those 4 dots, will be called a state. They'll be given a president. I mean, there already is a president over 15%. Why not a president, maybe the same president over 10%? You know, and you'll have a parliament, and the United States will ensure that this Palestinian state is accepted as a member of the UN, just to give it that legal, formal status. Now we have 2 states, right? And I mean, nobody knows that the Palestinian state is 10% non-viable, non-sovereign, a Bantustan under an encompassing Israeli apartheid regime, but that will be the reality. And if you don't believe me, here's the ultimate source. Here's Netanyahu in the UN on the podium of the General Assembly, September 22nd, 2023, 2 weeks before October 7th. And this is all, this normalization process is all out in public. This is the new Middle East. And Netanyahu says we're on the cusp of signing with Saudi Arabia. That's the jewel in the crown for the Abrahamic Accords and the normalization process. So look, here's Israel. I mean, it's he's not even pretending that, you know, there's some sop to the Palestinians. This is a greater Israel over all of Palestine. Now, he does accept the idea of apartheid, of course. He needs a two-state solution to relieve himself of the Palestinian population, Netanyahu. But the Palestinian Bantustan, or the state that we talked about on 10%, is so small that it can't even appear on this map. So he says, all right, who cares? The hell with it. And this is the map of a greater Israel, normalizing with this part of the Sunni, the so-called moderate Sunni Arab world, with Saudi Arabia. So this is normalization. And normalization is so important because, first of all, like I said, it buries the settler colonial past. And so now Israel comes across as the only democracy in the Middle East, a European country, part of NATO, helping the West, you know, and the moderate Arab states in their, you know, against what he called in the UN the curse, which is Iran, and China in the background, and it's all fine. Normal, and that's the danger to the Palestinians, because there's nowhere to go from normalization. If we don't stop this normalization process, or at least monitor it, so they don't succeed in giving us a Bantustan instead of a, you know, something just, then the Palestinians are really kind of lost. There's nowhere to go after normalization. The struggle would be very hard to start again. All right, I just have a minute left, I hope. So I just want to just finish with 2 things really quickly. One is settler colonialism can win. I mean, it's not just. We like stories in which, you know, the good and the just always prevail, but that's not the way the world works. And so there's a real, I'm telling you, there's a real possibility that with the Judaization of Palestine and a process of normalization of the apartheid system happening today, Israel could win. Settler colonialism could actually win. And I'm talking about a short time period. you know, if there's a ceasefire maybe in Gaza in November, they're going to go back to the normalization process. Saudi Arabia is anxious to get back to the normalization process, you know, in January, February, March. So we have a fairly, you know, short window here to mobilize around this, which I don't think we're going to do, but we should do. But settler colonialism can also be defeated by what I call the Palestinians, and this depends on the Palestinians. And maybe here, Daoud and I have maybe a difference in emphasis. I think the Palestinians have to be the agency. Nobody else can do it. We can all support the Palestinians, and we do, but this has to be a program, a scenario articulated by Palestinians that really addresses their needs. They have to define and they have to lead. So summoning power means three things. Resisting, Palestinian resistance, and you've had that for more than a century now. And that's what's kept the Palestinian struggle alive. But again, you know, Palestinians only have a limited amount of resistance power. And what Israel is doing now is trying to extinguish the last vestiges of resistance, which is Gaza, Hamas in Gaza, and in the Jenin, Tulkarm refugee camps in a few scattered places in the West Bank, and Hezbollah. So, you know, resistance is important, but it's not enough. Even if it's sustained, it has to pass the gauntlet on to political actors. There has to be a political program. You cannot be in a political struggle without a program. Palestinians have no program today, and they're not actors. They're not players. No, they're not at the table even. And all your great, important mobilization here keeps the issue alive, but you can't take that final step of saying, this is the program of the Palestinians, and this is, now we're going to move it into our government. That's the problem. The second piece, a political program, is missing. Daoud and I are involved in the One Democratic State campaign, so we're trying to formulate a program and begin to organize, and then we can lead and direct the mobilization that you've all done, but this has to be in the direction of the one-state solution, and on that I want to conclude, I promise. The one democratic state thing is fairly straightforward. There's no hidden agendas, there's no cantons and federations, confederations and power sharing and none of that stuff. It's a straightforward proposition, it's honest, it's transparent, and that is basically one country with one constitution, equal rights for everyone, everyone living in the country, equal civil rights, one parliament, one set of laws, you know, a normal democracy, period. In that country then, where everyone lives and works wherever they want to, it's going to take a lot of imagining. When I present this sometimes to Palestinians, they say, yeah, but what about the settlements? I say, no, there are no more settlements. There's communities in this part of Palestine or the country that are integrated. They have no control. There are no more settlements. Well, what about the wall? No, there is no more. I mean, understandably, it's hard for Palestinians to even imagine what this would mean. But that's what it means. The refugees return, of course, and get reintegrated into society. Like every democracy, there's individual rights, freedom of speech, freedom of association, freedom of religion, freedom of movement, and so on. And here is where we get into one issue that really does divide the one democratic state movement. I'm not going to get into it right now, but just to highlight it for a second, and that's this issue of collective rights. I would say, and Daoud can, Wael, the Palestinian I talked to last night, disagreed with me, but let's see what Daoud says. There's two visions or two concepts of one democratic state. I would say the vast majority of Palestinians favor this being a Palestinian state. In other words, for Palestinians, and I don't want to speak, put words in Daoud's mouth, but for Palestinians, liberation means liberation. You know, we get our country back. It's called Palestine. It's a Palestinian state. Our rights of self-determination are restored. Our national rights are restored. And this becomes Palestine. And within the Palestinian state, everyone has equal civil rights. Jews that remain, Israelis, everybody has equal rights in this Palestinian state. But Jews are not a national group. Jews are an ethnic group, they're a religious group or whatever. They're not Israeli Jews anymore, they're Jews. They become Palestinian Jews. In a way, they become Palestinians. Although here there's a certain contradiction between, are we talking about Palestinians as a people that I'm not sure want Smotrich and Netanyahu to join them as being Palestinians, or are we talking about Palestinians as a civil identity of the state? So there's that issue. But that's, I would say, the mainstream position of most Palestinians. I don't think they thought it all through, but just intuitively. The other alternative that our group represents, although I'm not sure everybody in our group does, but it in a way represents, it says something else. That we have to bite the bullet. That, you know, Palestinians would say, we can't recognize Israeli Jews as a national group. If we do that, we're rewarding settler colonialism. It goes against everything I just said. Here, Zionists get up, they invent an identity, they invent a narrative, they conquer the country, they normalize it. Now what do you want us Palestinians to do? Recognize them as a national group? That we're accepting basically ourselves the settler colonial legitimacy. So we're not going to do that. That's I think what the vast majority of Palestinians would say. Our position is different, at least on paper, and we're saying, justly or unjustly, Israeli Jews are a national group. They've become a national group. They've had almost 80 years of sovereignty. And if you try to suppress that nationalism, if you try to force them to become somehow an ethnic or religious group, you're planting the seeds of conflict. Because national groups do not reduce themselves to something else. And that's a sociological, political reality that the Palestinians have to accept. But it doesn't really matter. Because the state, well, in a way for Palestinians it matters, the state then is not a Palestinian state. The state is a civil state. It might be called Palestine, or Palestine Israel, or Zatar. You know, we have to really invent a new state. A civil state that belongs to all its citizens, right? And then within that state, you have two national groups. It's not a binational state, but it recognizes a binational reality. So within this civil society, this civil state, Palestinian Arabs and Israeli Jews have cultural rights of self-determination. They have every expression of their national identity. They have their religious holidays, they have their museums. Birzeit University is there next to the Hebrew University. The national groups have their language, their literature. Every expression of national identity is fine, but within the framework of a single civil state. And what that does, the real benefit of that, is it kind of releases the young generation from having to live within these boundaries of Palestinian, Israeli. I mean, it's there. You can be as much a part of your community as you want, but it allows the emergence of a new, shared civil society in the country. You know, and I think young people, I mean, it's hard to say this in the time of genocide, but you know, young people move on fairly quickly. And this kind of a state would allow them to move on and move on as a shared civil society. The economy will be good. You know, it has a good economy. Palestinians are not the blacks in South Africa. You know, they're educated, they have skills. Many of them are already involved in high tech and all kinds of more modern industries. So I think, personally, I think in this kind of a state, the Palestinians would achieve economic and social parity with the Israelis, I think within a half a generation, actually. And so, you know, it's a very hopeful, a very constructive vision of the future. It's hard to sell visions of the future at a time of genocide, but this is what we see, at least, or I see at least, as the way out. And it follows, again, from the logic of settler colonialism because it decolonizes settler colonialism. The Israelis have no more structures of domination and control. Israeli Jews have no way of exerting any kind of political domination or whatever. And in fact, the Palestinians are the majority population in this civil democracy.
Very good.
So.
Thank you, Jeff. Just before I invite questions from the audience, and as Daoud moves up here, Chair, Daoud, would you respond to some of the things that Jeff has said? Can we start with hearing from you, and then I said we'll open up to the audience.
Yeah, I think the idea that it's I think with the last idea, it's that we agree with one democratic state, but there are many different forms of one democratic state. Again, I will start by saying I don't see how we can reach. There is no strategy by any group how to reach a solution. The only strategy is the liberation. So, again, with the liberation, it's a political program. There is a political program in Palestine. Despite if you like it, you don't like it, there is a political program. And Hamas has a political program. Hamas is not a religious group promoting religion. It's a political movement that has a political program, and everything that they did, including the October 7th event, it also has a political program behind. We can agree or disagree with this political program, but there is a political program.
But it's a kind of a two-state political program, isn't it?
Not really. It's even more than the liberation of Palestine political program. It's beyond the liberation of Palestine. It's also the unity of the Ummah. So it's like Ummah, it's the nation. So we have two different terms in Arabic for nationalism and nationalism. There is the national Palestinian people, let's say, or level, and we have the nation, the Arab nation, in a way. So this is an old, new program that it's coming all the time in different forms that include the Islamic nation, Islamic Arab nation. And that's why we have this big solidarity, because the understanding of the Palestinians and many different other Arab or Muslim groups and communities, that Israel is not just an occupation or settler colonial project in Palestine. As I said, its functioning rule is beyond Palestine. That's why the map of Netanyahu has Sudan as example. And this is a big question. What is the role of Israel in Sudan? What is the role of Israel in Africa? What is the role of Israel in the Red Sea? There is a very important role of Israel to keep the supremacy by controlling trade, military, and many different things. So I can say we have different political programs. We don't have one political program that all the Palestinians will agree on, but the political program is the liberation. So Palestinians, we agree with the liberation as a strategy, as also a political program for ending the settler colonialism in Palestine. With after that, with the democratic state, we still have like many different imaginations how it could be, and talks, and I can say it's still kind of an elitist conversation, that it's not transferred to a popular movement or a realistic strategy how we can achieve it and engage the people to really go to achieve or implement the one democratic state as a solution. And within these like dialogues with the collective rights, it's still problematic because it's racializing the problem again. Within what you said, you excluded the Palestinians who served in the Israeli army. So are they Israelis or Palestinians? They are Zionists. They served in the army. They are part of the problem. They contributed directly to the settler colonialism. They benefited from settler colonialism. They died in Gaza or in different events. So they are not Jews. So we exclude them from the Israeli identity or not? We have this perspective, and I think personally that it's the collective rights and the Israelization or Israel as a national group. It's mainly by Western Israeli Jews to keep the white supremacy. And it's not, I never heard it from any Ethiopian Israeli Jews or from a Russian Israeli Jews. And I expressed this like a life experience that my best way to boycott Israeli goods in Haifa was not to buy from a Palestinian shop because most of the products are Israeli products. But if I went to a Russian shop, there are no Israeli goods. There are no products, no Israeli products in the Russian. And even it's not in Hebrew. So can we call these Russian community and Israelis or Russians? So how, it's still complicated. So it's problematic. We can question it, we can criticize it, we can think of how we can describe Israel as a national or nation or a group within a solution. So it's still a problematic topic. We have to critically approach it and think of it. And again, it's like something for the future. We can agree, disagree now, but in reality, whoever will liberate or end or get a victory in this struggle will decide what will be the future. And this is the most important. If we can spread the program of how we can create justice for everyone based on understanding of that we are all humans and we deserve to live in justice without the oppressed relation. We can solve this problem from being reproduced in the future again and again, because a liberation is not the end. Solving the problem with victory, defeat, whoever will be achieving the victory or the defeat is not the end point of this struggle. There will be another continuity for this struggle, and as we saw in many different places and experiences. The last point is that I also don't agree that the South Africa model ended the apartheid. It reproduced the apartheid with neutralizing or eliminating the political struggle, but keeping the economic struggle. There is no land distribution in South Africa. There is no economy justice in South Africa. So I can call it still apartheid in a different way of reforming the apartheid in a soft way and eliminating the struggle, the political struggle of the South Africans, and then they continue living within an oppressed situation. And even the townships in South Africa are living in more terrible situation, or more than many Palestinian refugee camps. So we don't want to reproduce that by reproducing white supremacy or undermining the class struggle with saying some Palestinians can really fit within high-tech or the economy, the new liberal economy, because it's adopting the dominant class, the Palestinian dominant class within a new reformed domination of white-black together, similar to the reformation of the Palestinian Authority, that now it's considered betraying the Palestinian people from Palestinian perspective. So we can talk a lot about it. We can also bring many problematic questions or critical approach to all these, but again, the most important and the urgency is to work hard to end the genocide and to stop the ongoing genocide.
Thank you. Thank you. Already for this conference, you're seeing why we chose the theme for today, focusing on the big picture. Where are we headed in Palestine, Israel? Because there are so many factors, so many complexities to look at. You know, overall, yes, we want to see the end of settler colonialism. We want to see immediate ceasefire. But in order to bring this justice and the liberation, there's a lot to unpack. So some of that we've just started on, you know, by hearing from you as we have. Thank you. But now this is a time for questions. We'll start here. So question, and we'll start here with you, Ian.
I've got two related questions. I take Daoud's point about the economic differences about South Africa, but I'd like to just mention political differences, political similarities. And a lot of people in this room are old enough to remember in 1960, the British anti-apartheid movement started. And a lot of people changed their behaviour in the UK, and this was not the only pressure on South Africa. I mean, the banks, South Africa became a pariah. It didn't go into the Olympic Games. There was a whole thing about sport. I mean, I think the Israeli equivalent would be to get Israel out of the Eurovision Song Contest. However, the point is, it took 34 years between 1980 and 1994 for there to be democratic elections in South Africa. 34 years. So any change, we're not talking about in the next few years. And that's one big point. The second point is the British Empire, as was, and certainly it is, has a lot of experience of dealing with terrorists who then become mature democrats and politicians. Martin McGuinness ended up shaking hands with the Queen. Mau Mau were categorized as terrorists, and they became part of the independent Kenya. There are lots of other examples. What would it take for Hamas to be at the table? You know, because everybody, all the United States and Europe, is basically saying they're terrorists, we cannot talk to them, we're not dealing with them, and anyhow, we're killing them all their leaders. Huh? What would it take for Hamas to get at the table?
Thank you. Daoud, would you like to start?
Again, I think we had this scenario in that specific moment of reforming the world from colonialism to what's so-called post-colonialism in the 90s, where I see it as reforming colonialism in a new colonialism rather than post-colonialism. And within that situation, this relation, bringing what were considered terrorists on the table to make agreements and shake hands, was done also in Palestine with the Oslo Accords with Yasser Arafat, that was considered a terrorist before. And it didn't work. It didn't work anywhere. The significance of Palestine, it was the resistance, because the political resistance continued in Palestine. We still hear the Palestinian voice. And I don't think that Hamas is going to reproduce the mistake that was done in the 90s by Fatah and Yasser Arafat. So if there is a real deal for justice, for liberation, for solution, Hamas already expressed that it's ready for different scenarios, including the two-state solution, even in the 90s. The Israeli response for the talk of Ahmad Yassin from the Israeli jail in Israeli media, which is significant. It was never done by any of the Palestinian leaders of the PLO before, to talk to Israeli media. He was accepting to engage in the Oslo process. The Israeli response was assassinating two of the main leaders of Hamas. And it's an ongoing process of neutralizing any possibility for any solution by Israeli settler colonial project. And this is the understanding of settler colonialism. Settler colonialism is not about making a deal or shaking hands or reaching an agreement. It's about the elimination of the native. It's the elimination of the people. So if we understand it from this perspective, we will see that there will be no way for reaching an agreement through negotiation, sadly. The possibility to have this like end of the solution, it will be a pressure from inside or a pressure from outside. Pressure from outside, it's the easier one. It's a pressure from the Western countries, the supporters of the Israeli settler colonialism, or Zionist settler colonialism, which lack the willing, because the power that can really make this pressure is still weak. It's even weak for the cases of their people in Western countries. So the parties that will struggle for any case for like homeless people or immigration or not making a change in the UK for their own people. And they will not make change for any international cases or Palestine case within this weakness. That's why I'm saying it's very important, if the pressure will be from outside, to have a stronger work, unity, coalitions, solidarity than that what we have, not just for Palestine, but also for all the people around the world, because it's not only in Palestine, but the level of and the scale of genocide, oppression in Palestine is much more than anywhere else. So the willing to achieve any possible justice in Palestine by all the Palestinian political parties and people, it's there. But from the other side, it's never there, because even in the Oslo Accords, Rabin said it clearly. We did this agreement and we will never allow a Palestinian state, even if he was assassinated for this agreement and peace process, and not peaceful peace that was achieved. It was just a peace process. So even Ariel Sharon, there are conspiracy theories about his death or coma, because he expressed clearly in the media that he is going to end the occupation from one side by pulling out of the West Bank, or part of the West Bank and part of Gaza, and build a wall. So many conspiracy theory at that time emerged about him being assassinated to prevent limitation of the expansion of the Zionist settler colonialism, even if it's wrong. It's showing and expressing the mentality, the notion, the ideology of settler colonizers aiming to expand all the time. So I don't think the problem is Hamas or any other Palestinian political party, even if it's demonized, and this is part of the Israeli strategy, and you can find it online, delegitimizing the Palestinians to prevent the possibilities that the Western communities, as the deep supporters or mother countries of the settler colonialism in Palestine, to be engaged with possible solutions. So we have different literatures about it. So Palestinian leadership was delegitimized by the ideology machine, the media, and the same was done with Yasser Arafat, with other political parties, with Hamas, with many other individuals, and also in different other cases. I hope that it's answering the question. It's like we can explain more. But
Thank you. And now, thank you. Jeff, any response you'd like to make, please?
Well, I have a number of responses to Daoud, but I'll build them into the questions, so it's the few. I just relate to the South African thing for a second, because that kind of came up. You know, the Chinese have a great saying that you might know, but the second mouse gets the cheese. Think about that for a second. You know, so that South Africa went through its process. You know, if Palestine is the second mouse, then we can begin to learn from the mistakes that were made in South Africa. And there were two things in particular. You know, I mentioned it. I didn't go into really detail, but it's in our program. The whole one democratic state is preceded by a thorough process of decolonization. And that never happened in South Africa. Not only economic, but land. I mean, the land is still apartheid land. It's still in the hands mainly of the white population, in all kinds of things. So we do a process of decolonization that's very conscious and deliberate and thought out. And the other thing is, you know, in terms of the economics, there again, you know, we have to really be sure that, you know, economic apartheid doesn't you know, come in. I think most of the people in our group would say, but we haven't talked about it enough. We still have to flesh out the program. But I think most of our people would talk about a socialist economy in some way, and not a neoliberal economy. But there's one other, and so South Africa, I think one of the reasons why they got into that mess was, don't forget, 1989 is when the Soviet Union collapsed, which helped in terms of isolating South Africa. I mean, that helped in terms of ending apartheid, but at the same time, that initiated the whole structural adjustment program of the IMF. This is the shock therapy that Naomi Klein writes about in Disaster Capital, you know, that took place at that time, and that's exactly when the apartheid regime collapsed. So what happened was the ANC got stuck with an IMF that was with these structural adjustment policies. I think that's changed in the IMF. They've sort of seen the mistakes in a way, but I think that's something that we can avoid in the future. Just one other point really quick, and that is, you know, in South Africa, the ANC didn't wait for the whites to agree. We often hear that, well, there can never be one state because the Israelis will never accept it. Well, I would say forget the Israelis. Forget is the polite term. I have other terms. You know, in South Africa, you know, the ANC knew that the whites were committed to the apartheid regime. I mean, why would they dismantle it? They were benefiting from it. And so they bypassed the white community, they bypassed the government, and they went right to us. I mean, all of us of a certain age, which is most of us, were involved in the anti-apartheid struggle. You know, and we played a key role in isolating South Africa, like you're saying, making it a pariah state. Corporations pulled out, the BDS was very effective, and it collapsed. So that, you know, it became unsustainable. Now, what the ANC did, and I think maybe what we have to do, which is going to be difficult at a time of genocide, in 1955, they issued the Freedom Charter. And the Freedom Charter said, we're all South Africans. And then they drafted a constitution before the end of apartheid. So the whites were never convinced that, you know, we should end apartheid. They all thought there'd be a bloodbath. That was their term for the end of apartheid. But when it happened, when the collapse happened, and they saw that they had a future in the new South Africa, and so the transition to democracy went fairly smoothly. And I think that's something we can replicate. I think I don't care what the Israelis say. We have to make the Israeli apartheid regime collapse, make it unsustainable, and that's very doable. Even today, Israel's very vulnerable. Its economy's not good. It's been downgraded 3 times by the international credit agencies. It's becoming a pariah state. Soon FIFA, actually it was supposed to be already, FIFA is supposed to vote on excluding Israel from football, you know, in all kinds of ways. So, you know, that's a real possibility. And then when we make it unsustainable and there's a transition to, but here's where I disagree with you. I don't think liberation is a broad concept. You really need a program, because if you're going to ask Israelis and the international community, you know, that's going to watch out for the well-being of Israeli Jews, you know, to go along with a one-state idea, you have to really show them that they really have a place, that they'll be secure, that there really is, you know, the equal civil rights and so on. So I think if we can do that, to show Israelis and the international community that the one democratic state is a win-win for everybody, then I think Israeli Jews, even though they would never accept the idea of ending their own apartheid, would be forced to go through this process of transition to a democracy. So I think, in those kinds of ways, South Africa does offer a really useful model, and that is a process going from where we are, into something new. I mean, we're the second mouse. So, the first mouse pioneered the way.
Great, thank you. I'll take a couple of questions, starting Amanda, you, and then we'll see.
So this was to maybe Daoud. So I'm just thinking about the disempowerment that's been created.
Could you speak up?
Speak a little more.
I'm trying to hear you.
And maybe come closer.
So I'm thinking of the disempowerment that's been created by the Israelis throughout all of Palestine, but all Palestinian people. And I feel, where is the Palestinian diaspora? How can we raise its confidence and its power? We're nearly all British, sort of like white people here. Where are the Palestinian diaspora? And why, and how can we raise their voices? I mean, in the African National Congress and all of that, there were huge voices, powerful voices, managing to unite people. Why do we have to just rely on Hamas and Hezbollah, and where are the people in the diaspora? And why aren't they raising their voices, and how can we empower them and give them confidence?
Okay, so we've got that question, and I'm going to hear another one. Yes, Sophia, you have a question.
Thank you. Just that it's really interesting, actually, the discussion around South Africa, the anti-apartheid movement there. And I guess what you were saying, Jeff, in your presentation, aligns very much in terms of the pillars of struggle, that anti-apartheid movement speak about and are still speaking about, and actually are trying to use that in reaching out to Palestinians to say, well, and there, of course, it doesn't map on, the question about the Palestinian program, the internal sort of mobilization and organization is certainly not the same. But certainly in terms of international solidarity, there is BDS, and especially in a time of genocide, as everyone has commented, it is urgent. And I guess, you don't know, of course, we don't have a crystal ball, but do we actually have 34 years, 20 years, because there is a process right now of genocide. So in relation to international solidarity, my question, and it's around the one state and the paradigm shift, if you like. I think one thing that I think we probably need to tackle in the international solidarity movement is this default position of supporting the two-state solution. Whether it's our governments, our politicians, trade unions, that is a default position. And in a way, well, it does lead to paralysis and inaction, deliberate or otherwise, but I think it is critical because it sort of stops anyone from going beyond looking at, well, what action needs to be done now, because there's still that protection of the Zionist project in the use of the two-state. So my question is around the international solidarity role around BDS, but certainly in tackling and challenging the two-state even from friends, who are in support of Palestinian rights, etc., still come out of the two-state, but it leads to it, I don't think, especially now.
So we've got that. So I will do these two, and then we'll do another question. Okay, Daoud, would you start on the first one, responding to Palestinians in the diaspora?
Yeah. I will try to link the question also to a sentence that Jeff mentioned from a Palestinian perspective, to just try to explain how it sounds to us. If a genocide is not enough to convince the international community to stop military occupation and all what we saw online streamed is a program to ensure that we will ensure that the Jewish people will live in justice in the future will be enough to convince the international community. From this perspective, I don't think that any Palestinian now is convinced or believe that change will come from international community, even though the possibility is still there. But after 1 year of live streaming a genocide and no change, we have less people going out in demonstrations now than 1 year ago. So this is a big question about the power relation in the West, which also limit the possibility of a Palestinian movement. And I can see a lot of Palestinians with, and I heard these voices a lot since even the beginning, that Palestinians are not really, some Palestinians are not really happy with a different type of solidarity because it's good, it's numbers, but it's not really challenging the political domination of the UK government or any other Western government. That's why we don't have, we didn't see any change in politics or the strategies. So if we have a serious, like a really something that we believe on, a movement or whatever strategy or program, people will follow. But until now, the only serious thing that is challenging the occupation is Hamas and Hezbollah, the resistance. So the Palestinian people, I can say, they can see that it's hard, but this is a situation that we're living for a long time, and I don't see any other scenarios or possibilities for stepping out of the settler colonialism. And this is from a Palestinian perspective, and this is the hope. So if you ask Palestinian people, usually the hope is, again, existence is resistance, and the existence and resistance is what keep the hope of the Palestinian people. And I'm not undermining that solidarity is part of the resistance. Solidarity in the West is feeding the strength and the hope and the resistance and keeping this hope alive. But again, diaspora were there. The Palestinian resistance started with after the Nakba with the diaspora. And there was like a shift of the center or the leadership of the Palestinian PLO or resistance from Jordan to Lebanon, from Lebanon to Algeria, from Algeria to the West Bank, from the West Bank now to different places. I don't know what will be next from resistance. Even if the Israeli settler colonialism will eliminate all the Palestinians from Gaza, it never says that the Palestinian resistance will end. And I think with reforming, the global reformation of that is happening after the genocide on Gaza, I think the Palestinian resistance will ally with different other groups, will resist racism, anti-immigration policies, and I hope that it will be a global movement against the white supremacy and white colonialism that is not limited to Palestine and will bring more unity and justice for all the oppressed people. So this is a wish, this is trying to see the future, and I don't know if this shift of resistance will move again to the diaspora and will give a strong position of diaspora or not, but I think yes, it will be, but it's a slow process and not limited to Palestinians.
Jeff, which was
We just have a couple minutes
exactly.
just to emphasize the fact that we just have a couple minutes. And so I want to combine, my response, to some of the things that Daoud is saying. Daoud and I have had different conversations, and we're in the same group in a way, but pushing each other. And we're really in a process of, I think, in the whole One Democratic State movement, of really trying to reconcile, different positions. I mean, first of all, I just want to say that, you know, I guess one of the major differences between us is that I really see an urgency here. I mean, there's an urgency for a ceasefire, a permanent ceasefire. You know, the urgency, I mean, I'm arguing there's an urgency to stop the normalization process. I don't know how we do that. It's hard to organize people around normalization, but there's an urgency for a political program. I mean, the idea that somehow we're not ready and it'll take a long time and the future is out there somewhere, I mean, I don't accept that. I think that we need a political program now, and I think that this is the moment. I think the political conditions are right now for the Palestinians to get up and express their agency and a program, but, you know, again, more detailed than just liberation, you know, and I think they and us together could actually succeed. I mean, I don't want to sound Pollyannish, but if I didn't believe that we could actually succeed politically, from really reading the political map, I wouldn't be engaged in this. I'd be writing my anthropology books quietly at home somewhere. So I think there's an urgency that I don't always feel, even from my Palestinian colleagues, you know, that often say to me, well, yeah, it's not the time and we have to wait and there's a process. Even in our group there's a huge argument now. And maybe I'm one side of the argument and everybody else is the other side of the argument, about becoming a movement. We have a plan, we're the first group that's come out with a detailed political plan, 10 points. It's a Palestinian-led group. You know, we could build support all over, but our group has decided, no, we're not going to become a movement. So what are we? We're a discussion group, I don't know. And I really don't get it. I mean, I've been trying to understand, and I think one of the things, and I just want to make, because Daoud touched on this, and I think it's important. I mean, I'm looking at a book now that I'm reading called The Palestinian National Movement by Amal Jamal, that gets into this a lot. And that is that, and maybe we'll give Daoud another minute to respond, but I think one of the problems is, to be honest, at least this is what I'm thinking of, is that there is no tradition, maybe, in Palestine or in the Arab world of civil society coming up, you know, and being a political agent. The idea that civil society, a group like ours gets up, takes leadership, has a program, recruits people, and then connects with you guys and becomes a leader, like the ANC did, for example. Instead, everybody works through parties, you know, and so I think in our group, people are saying, you know, we only have to work. Well, there is a movement to try to revive the PLO, and they're having meetings in Doha, and people in our group are involved, Awad and other people. You know, the idea that there has to be a national leadership that isn't us, there has to be a PLO that doesn't really exist, or we have to work through political parties. We have no mandate, it's just the people, to take a leadership role. And what's ironic about this, and this is where I would push Daoud, all the political parties, in my view, in Palestine, from the PFLP to Hamas and Islamic Jihad, are two-state parties. I mean, Daoud was talking about this. The vast majority of Palestinians reject the idea of an Israeli national identity. They reject the idea of binationalism. Okay. But at the same time, they insist that they're only going to work through political parties. And all the political parties are binational. They're all two states, I would say, including Hamas. I mean, Hamas has a bigger ideology and so on. But it's said from the prisoner's document until, through its covenant until today, that it won't recognize a Palestinian, an Israeli state. It won't legitimate, but it will live within Israel. It'll live with a two-state solution. So we're in a weird situation where there's a kind of a refusal of civil society, like our group, to really stand up, become an agent, push our program forward, and hell with the political parties. And this whole and I think the really idea in Palestine that we can't do that. We have no mandate to do that. That kind of relates to that question of why aren't the Palestinians visible? Where are they? They're not leading us, and you need that kind of I need that kind of leadership. I'm not Palestinian. And yet and we have the program in a way that we should develop more, and there is an urgency, but it's just not happening. So I guess in the last minute, I would throw it back to Daoud about what the fuck's going on.
So, yeah, it's a good interpretation, but not a full interpretation of the political parties, because the state, centralizing the state issue, it's like a wrong approach or wrong question that will lead to a wrong answer. So from Palestinian perspective, for all the political parties, the state is not the problem. It's responding to the Western domination of looking at the solution as a state. But political parties were looking for the right to return as the central key of the Palestinian cause. So without the right to return of the Palestinians, there will be no solution in Palestine. And one state or two states, again, it can never be achieved without ending the occupation. You can say which occupation in 1948 lands and 67, or only in 1967. In both cases, ending the occupation, it's even if it's in 1967, it's one step for reaching not the state, but the full justice rights of the Palestinians, including the right to return of the Palestinian refugees. So in this case, we're not talking about two-state solution, because centralizing the state, it will be the wrong angle of looking at what the political parties are aiming to. So justice, it's what has to be achieved, and if it's a form of one state or two states or no state, it can be achieved in different way. But justice is more important, implementing the human rights or Palestinian national rights, by again emphasizing that the most important one is the right to return of the Palestinian refugees. And then within each political party there is another program beyond. So uniting Arab countries is the program that went all the time, and we have a lot of literatures and theories about it. What comes first? Uniting the Arab countries to liberate Palestine, or liberating Palestine to unite the Arab countries? Or we have to liberate Palestine to unite the Muslim ummah, Muslim people? So we have different programs. We have different political parties that express these programs. And with the agency, this is another problem. Do we agree or we disagree? So Palestinians chose Hamas within the parliament election that was not accepted by anyone. So the support of the PA and sustaining division and creating division in Palestine, because the agency, the self-determination, is not accepted if it's not really matching the Western perspective and the white supremacy style. So if the Palestinian people decided the leadership is Hamas, is it going to be accepted? So the conditional support of the pro-Palestinian is still there, with as I call it always, the white supremacy, because it has all the time to fit our measures and the style and how we imagine things has to be. And in this case, this is the conditional support. It's like trying to say, you have to be in this case, you have to answer this question, you have to ensure the future for the Jews, you have to be within this criteria, nothing else. So this is a conditional support that aiming to sustain the white supremacy, as I see it, in a way. So the agency of the Palestinian, it was done by choosing democratically Hamas to form the Palestinian government. And since then, we don't have any more elections, because we know that the Palestinian might choose Hamas again. And this is the main condition of the United States and Israel for any future reformed Palestinian authority, to be without Hamas. And it's the same for Lebanon, to pull the Hezbollah out of the government. Even if we agree or disagree with Hezbollah, it's the Lebanese self-determination or willing to vote and the agency to choose And that these conditional colonial conditions on who has to be in and out is not accepted. So if you want to look for Palestinian leadership and agency, you have to accept what the Palestinians are choosing, even if it's a different political program that we might agree or disagree, as we showed that we can have a disagreement, but we still work together. We have different approaches, but we have respect and we have a lot of efforts that we do together, which is important. Critical perspective, it's very important, and I can say again, let's think again of the axioms, the premises, where we start, how we look at things, and challenge it, and then from there we start thinking again and rethinking where we stand, where is the corner or the lens that we view Palestine from, and then things might be changed, and also the strategies and programs that we have might change. And
So
thank you.
let's thank Jeff and Daoud. Thank you. Thank you.